This film is strictly for educational purposes only.
Dr. Dillingham, do I look white to you? Do I look white to you?
Congresswoman, I think that if you tell me what you identify with, and I think I would respect that.
Sure. So, Dr. Director, are you aware that people like me who are Arab, Middle Eastern, North African have to indicate that they're white on the U.S. Census? White on the U.S. Census?
Congresswoman, we actually have on the, and I understand, you know, that there was a process in deciding, certainly before I got to the census, and there's a history to coming up with the questions and the race and the ethnicity categories, and that OMB...
No, they ignored it.
Director,
but they ignored it. The previous administration decided to put me on the form. They ignored it. But do you think if I circled white category, that would be an accurate depiction of my racial and ethnic background?
Congresswoman, we do not second guess what you put down
okay.
there.
Well,
and we do have a write-in. We do have a write-in.
Director, you're not giving me an option, because let me tell you, there's a reason why the recommendation happened. Yeah. Because would circling white on the census change my lived experience as a person of color in our country, right? Even saying that.
You understand there's a difference when you actually have the check-off box,
And I mean, you know, Director, we need to get it right, because I'm not white. I'm not. And I don't just, you know, try to say to others that you should be this or that. But when I sit on this form and I look at it, I don't see myself represented on this form. And I think that's a huge issue for people like me.
Congresswoman, I can assure you that we continue to study race and ethnicity and the options for self-reporting that.
Director.
And let me just say that
but we've been studied enough.
We want your views, and we're beginning the process of looking at the 2030 census.
It's too late. It's too late, because for 10 years we will be invisible to health research, to a number of things, small business loans. We will be invisible for another decade in our country. And I think it's wrong.
Throughout today's society of America, people are inadvertently undermining the importance of knowing what a census is and everything that comes along with it, due to their beliefs that it's just about counting the population. But a census serves a much deeper purpose from what is generally known to the public. In fact, the duties of a census goes well and beyond what the public could even imagine. Let's begin with the history of the census. Starting with a book entitled Key to the Publications of the United States Census from 1790 to 1887, the American Statistical Association shared a statement that was made by a distinguished French statistician by the name of Monroe de Jones, who spoke on the history of the U.S. Census, stating that, quote, "The United States represents in its history a phenomenon which has no parallel. It is that of a people who instituted the statistics of their country on the very day they founded their government, and who regulated in the same instrument the census of the citizens, their civil and political rights, and the destinies of the country." End quote. Now, this quote indicates that rules and regulations were initially set in place by the government that regulated the rights and the census of the citizens of America scientifically. Scientifically meaning in a systematic or methodical manner. However, what's interesting to point out here is that the American Statistical Association followed Monroe's statement by saying, quote, "The statistics of the country that the American founders had in mind were of the most meager description and had no scientific pretensions whatever." End quote. So, The authors of this book denied that the census was created in order to regulate its citizens scientifically. But that leaves us with a few questions. Why would Monroe make such a statement if it wasn't true? Could it be possible that the national census is being used as a form of regulation? And if so, what exactly could be regulated by taking a census? In the 1789 U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 states that, quote, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. End quote. Now, to the average person, this gives a detailed statement of the census and why it is conducted, but it also leaves one to wonder if the census is conducted in order to have an accurate representation within the House of Representatives. Because within this same article and section of the Constitution, it goes on to state, quote, the number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative. And until such number shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. End quote. And so if population totals were needed in order to choose representatives, why is it that Massachusetts, which is one of the smallest states compared with the other states listed here, have such a large number of representatives in 1789? Or maybe the question should be, how does the state of Massachusetts have a larger population count than the state of Georgia in 1789? It is common knowledge that the Census Bureau gathers statistical information, but what is not so commonly known is that the Bureau of the Census, which is the original name, is a section of the U.S. Department of Commerce. On July 1st, 1913, the U.S. Department of Commerce stated, quote, beginning with the second enumeration in 1800, the Secretary of State had general supervision until the establishment of the Department of Interior in 1849, when the Census Office was placed under that department to remain until it was transferred by the act approved February 14, 1903, to the Department of Commerce and Labor from and after July 1st, 1903. By order of the Secretary, July 1st, 1903, the name Bureau of the Census was adopted. So, what is the meaning behind the word census? According to the 1828 Webster's English Language Dictionary, the word census derives from the Latin word census, which is defined as a cense, and a cense is defined as a public rate or tax. Now, to rate something means to set a certain value on, to value at a certain price or degree of excellence. This is why you will find strangers ringing the doorbell of your homes in order to rate you, strictly for the purpose of taxation, and for many other reasons that I'm about to go over. It is also important to note that a tax is that which is imposed, a burden. It is a sum of money assessed on the person or property of a citizen by government for the use of the nation or state, which is usually laid out according to the income of a person or the value of a property's estate, which is the general interest of a government. So now that we are cognizant of what the term census means, we can determine why the census is instrumental in the growth of this country on a civil and political level. Keep in mind that the U.S. Marshals that were chosen to initially conduct the national census were originally recognized as the oldest federal law enforcement agency in America, which was established in 1789. According to usmarshals.gov, on September 24, 1789, President George Washington appointed the first 13 U.S. Marshals, following the passage of the first Judiciary Act. The U.S. Marshals were required by Congress to conduct the census every 10 years, from 1790 to 1870. These U.S. Marshals were historically known for conducting death sentences for the federal government on those condemned by federal courts. And they also have authorization to carry firearms and make arrests without warrant, even if they believe that a person may have committed a crime, without evidence to actually prove their suspicions. According to 28 U.S. Code 566, it is the primary role and mission of the United States Marshal Service to provide for the security and to obey, execute, and enforce all orders of the United States District Courts, the United States Courts of Appeals, the Court of International Trade, and the United States Tax Court as provided by law." End quote. According to records of the U.S. Senate and the National Archives, on March 2, 1790, an act providing for the actual enumeration of the inhabitants of the United States was established, stating, quote, "Be it enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that the marshals of the several districts of the United States shall be, and they are hereby authorized and required to cause the number of the inhabitants within their respective districts to be taken, omitting in such enumeration Indians not taxed, and distinguishing free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, from all others, distinguishing also the sexes and colors of free persons, and the free males of 16 years and upwards from those under that age." Just imagine the difficulty of performing such a task. It's as if the government sent informants or police officers into occupied neighborhoods to be nosy and ask the natives living there orchestrated personal questions. And depending on the type of neighborhood, this could be very dangerous for both the officers involved and the natives being questioned. It is important to note that the accuracy of information listed for the first census and subsequently for many censuses afterwards, this was a common problem where the U.S. Marshals were not able to go into certain territories or districts. The difficulty faced by U.S. Marshals and the need to acquire more accurate information prompted the government to go about taking a census in a totally different manner. In 1880, the authorization of the enumeration was transferred from the marshals to a body of officers known as the supervisors of the census. These supervisors were to train and employ U.S. citizens and to oversee these census takers in their respective districts. This was due to a law that was passed on March 3, 1879, known as the Census Act of 1879, that stated, quote, The Secretary of Interior shall, on or before the first day of March, 1880, designate the number, whether one or more, of supervisors of census to be appointed within each state or territory, who shall be residents of the state or territory. This Census Act also says that if you choose not to participate, or if you are not available when the census takers arrive, they will then ask your neighbors for the requested information, and it will be lawfully entered as being true. Chapter 195, Section 8 states, quote, "And in case no person shall be found at the usual place of abode of such family or individual living out of a family competent to answer the inquiries made in compliance with the requirements of this act, then it shall be lawful for the enumerator to obtain the required information as nearly as may be practicable from the family or families or person or persons living nearest to such place of abode." End quote. It is also important to note the contradictions that were made when it came to census taking after this act became lawful, because originally Indians not taxed were not enumerated, but the superintendent of the census was now authorized to, quote, "employ special agents or other means to make an enumeration of all Indians not taxed." So, why is it so important to get an accurate total of all persons, regardless if they are taxed or not? An accurate enumeration is needed in order to assess the industrial and military strength of the country, to estimate the country's wealth, and to also rate individuals at a set of particular values. In order to ensure that these rates were properly done, an act under which the Permanent Census Office was organized July 1st, 1902, provides, in addition to the collection of statistics of population, mortality, agriculture, and manufacturers at the decennial period, for a collection to also be made of statistics relating to special classes, including the insane, feeble-minded, deaf, dumb, and blind, to crime, pauperism, and benevolence, including prisoners, paupers, juvenile delinquents, and inmates of benevolent and reformatory institutions, to social statistics of cities, to public indebtedness, valuation, taxation, and expenditures, to religious bodies, to electric light and power, telephone and telegraph business, to transportation by water, express business, and street railways, etc. This means that a country's wealth could be predicted years in advance based on this type of knowledge, knowing that a person must take care of his or herself along with their families, from starting a career or getting a job to needing certain utilities and products for the household. The Census Bureau information could give other companies doing business with or within the U.S. a major advantage by surveying the statistical information gathered and by suggesting the best locations for businesses and products based on age, sex, and ethnicity of population in certain locations. In the Department of Commerce's Circular of Information concerning census publications from 1790 to 1916, which was published January 1st, 1917, it talks about the usefulness of census statistics to scientists, economists, manufacturers, dealers, bankers, and business and professional men, stating, quote, "The information of this character is of decided value to manufacturers of and dealers in many lines of commodities, and especially to those interested in public utility enterprises. The occupation statistics in particular can be utilized to advantage in deciding upon the most favorable location for a new plant or industry. That is to say, By the aid of these statistics, it is possible to ascertain whether in any given locality there is likely to exist an adequate supply of the special kinds of skilled labor required. Then it goes on to state that the contractor and builder can make good use of the population figures, since they indicate quite definitely the number and character of new buildings which, under normal conditions, would be required to house the inhabitants of his city. This information is shown by the increase in population of the city as a whole and of each of its wards as compared with the number of new houses built, the increase in the Negro population as compared with the new number of houses designed especially for their accommodation, the increase in the foreign element as compared with the number of new houses built for their use, etc. And soon after that, it also states, quote, "The industrial statistics taken in connection with those of population, including occupations, are of particular use to the banker, who may have depositors in certain elements of the population, or who may loan money for the development of certain lines of industry. They show the increase or decrease in the various industries not only to his own city, but in the country as a whole. And under normal conditions, he may expect a continuation of such increase or decrease." End quote. The Census Bureau is not limited to providing information for businesses. It also shares scientific information by providing hospitals, practitioners, and even pharmaceutical companies a person's vital information, whether it be medical or genealogical. According to the National Center for Biotechnology, which is a branch of the National Institution of Health, in 1902, when the U.S. Bureau of Census became a permanent agency for the federal government, authorization was given to the director of the Bureau to obtain annual copies of records filed in the Vital Statistics Office, which included death certificates and information regarding causes of death. During the year of 1915, when the National Birth Registration was established, birth certificates were added also, and by the year 1933, quote, all states were registering live births and deaths with acceptable event coverage and providing the required data to the Bureau for the production of national birth and death statistics, end quote. In 1946, the U.S. Bureau of the Census stopped the collection and publishing of vital statistics on a federal level. This task was then transferred from the U.S. Bureau of the Census to the Federal Security Administration, and then to the National Office of Vital Statistics. The National Office of Vital Statistics combined itself with the National Health Survey, which then established the National Center for Health Statistics in 1960. In 1987, the National Center for Health Statistics became a part of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. All of these departments share their statistical information with the U.S. Bureau of the Census, which is now known as the U.S. Census Bureau. So, the categoric selection given by the U.S. Census that you can choose from not only identifies rated or taxed groups by means of regulation, but these misnomers are also subjected to systematic racial discrimination, especially since these labels were designed to collect the number of persons that are completely comfortable with allowing strangers to label them as whatever they so choose, not knowing that a profit is still to be made continuously by you not knowing just who you really are. I'm just here to make you think.